Hi, everyone. So I hope your week is going well and that your spring semester and all your classes are starting off well. Um, so a quick note before I forget. As part of our semester, we have pretty much every week a La Lima quiz, right? And so the La Lima quiz is multiple choice. You find it in La Lima under tests and quizzes tool. It's 10 multiple choice questions. It's timed for 20 minutes. And the quiz is, it's open book, open notes, open internet if you want, but it's not open classmate, friend, family member who happens to be an immunologist, right? So you got to do it yourself. The first quiz will be due next week. At the normal time, which is the due date is Thursday nights by 11:55. Okay, and actually, let me double check that because I might have it set up separately. The quizzes are due Thursday nights at 11:55. And so I've already gone ahead and put a practice quiz up there on La Lima. You can find it now and you can kind of give it a try. The practice quiz does not count towards your grade, but it allows you to kind of see what the questions are like. All right. And it lets you make sure that your La Lima is working fine. So I encourage you to check out the practice quiz. It'll cover chapters 1 and 2. The practice quiz is just some general questions on the stuff that we're talking about now from chapters 1 and 2. The first real quiz I'll put up there, and that will be due next week, Thursday night at 11:55. In addition, we have also nearly every week a homework assignment. And so that homework assignment is using the IDAP inquisitive assignments tool that you'll find in La Lima. And that takes you to the Pearson Publishers IDAP site, where there are questions that I've selected from the pool of questions that they've sort of provided. And you can work on those throughout the week. Right, so I believe you can save your progress on those. So the way the IDAP, so by the way, so this information is in the syllabus and the schedule files, right? So if you haven't already downloaded the syllabus and the schedule files, I encourage you to do that and take a look, and you'll find reminders about when quizzes and the homeworks are due. So the way the IDAP inquisitive works is that you are presented questions in different formats based upon the chapter content. What's nice is that the IDAP assignment allows you to actually open up the ebook on the screen at the same time. Many of the questions provide an actual link to directly in the ebook, like where a particular paragraph is that talks about maybe the topic of the question, right? And for those of you who haven't done these IDAP type assignments before in your other classes, it's sort of like this interactive thing where some questions are multiple choice, some of them are matching, and you actually have the opportunity to adjust the point value of each question. So for example, if you read a question and you're like, oh, I feel very confident, I know the answer to this, right? You can slide the point value all the way up to like 100 points or something like that, right? Or if you say, I'm not really sure about this question, and you follow the ebook link and you read it and you're like, I still don't understand this question, you might slide that point value all the way down, right, to like 30 points or something like that, right? And the idea is it's kind of like a game show type of thing where you're wagering points. So if you then answer it and you get it right, you're rewarded that many points. If you answer incorrectly, then you lose however many points you wagered. So you might say, well, then why don't I always play it safe and just keep the little bar all the way down at like 30 points, right? Because in order for you to complete the homework assignment, you have to gain a certain number of points overall, right? Like maybe like 800 points or something like that in order for your assignment to be done, and then you get credit for it. So what that does mean is that it does take time I think typically students in the class spend anywhere from 40 minutes to an hour doing each of the homework assignments. But I mean, hey, it's homework, right? It's meant to be spread out over the week. But they find it very useful, right? And the other thing to keep in mind is that you can use the homework as a great way of getting familiar with the stuff that's in the book that's important, and also building up, right, your own comfort level with these topics. Because many of the questions actually feature things like short animations that allow you to watch something first, and then you can answer questions about it. Right? So I will make the IDAP assignments available after I've gone ahead and actually selected which questions that I want. So don't start the IDAP yet. Wait for me to send you an announcement to let you know that the sort of edited version of the first 2 chapters of IDAP assignments are up there. Okay. All right. But I wanted to give you a heads up about that. Let's go ahead and continue talking about the immune system and getting an overview, right, about what the immune system is all about, and sort of setting the groundwork for many of the topics that we're going to explore this semester. Right. So remember, where we left off last time was that we understood that our body must be ready to deal with a diverse range of different pathogens. Remember, the definition of a pathogen is something from the outside, a biological entity, right, that has a genome of its own. And therefore, if it gets into the tissues of our body and finds those tissue environments suitable, right, then those pathogens will carry out the instructions of their genome to carry out, what they're supposed to be doing. And a lot of times that involves multiplying and using up the resources of our body's tissues. And in the process of doing so, oftentimes causing damage, right, to our body, making us sick, and in some cases, right, even leading to death. Right? So we said that we are surrounded by pathogens every day. Most of them are common everyday pathogens that have been around like forever, right? Ever since human beings evolved, there have been certain pathogens around us. And therefore, we've developed a very good built-in general response to be able to just kind of detect generic pathogen types of signs, right? But at the same time, we mentioned last time that pathogens are always evolving. Right? Just like other living things on Earth, they evolve, right? And in some cases, pathogens aren't even living things, like viruses aren't technically alive, but they can evolve, quote unquote, also, right, by undergoing changes that alter their, for example, rate of infection, or that the way that they actually end up causing damage inside of our bodies. So as a result, all the time, there are new pathogens, right? New meaning maybe a particular pathogen that's been around for a long time that has changed to a certain degree, right? That it sort of represents something different now. And these might be new to you and your body, right? Never having encountered it before, or they might be new and brand new to the human species, right? So for example, the SARS-CoV-2, that is causing COVID that we've been living with now for the last 2 years, right? That's something that the human being, our human immune system, has never seen before, right? If our immune system is not able to deal with that, what happens? Well, we all die. We all die of COVID. Right? So obviously, we also have to have a side of our immune system that's not just looking for general, everyday kind of pathogen responses, right, that we've gotten used to over evolution, but we must have a side that is more focused on a special response to be able to recognize that something new is a threat and develop a way to go ahead and mount a defense against it. Right? So these two sides, these two arms of our immune system, the general side and the special side, can be thought of as our innate immunity and our adaptive immunity. Right? So today, I'm going to give you sort of an introduction to sort of comparing and contrasting these two sides. And we're going to go over a lot of stuff, but in a way that's more just meant to kind of show you a lot of stuff that we're going to be talking about as we then move on and have lectures that are focused on these different topics throughout the semester. Okay, so consider this. A general response that comes built in our body, right, to be able to detect common everyday pathogenic signals or signs, right, to protect us against common everyday pathogens, right? That's kind of like, think about it this way. There are certain features of pathogens, let's say bacteria or viruses, right, that are pretty generically something that you'd find on a bacteria or something that you'd find on a virus, right? And those have been around with our species long enough that over millions of years of evolution, right, our immune system has evolved to kind of be pretty confident that if you see certain types of signals, yeah, that's probably a pathogen. So let's pretend that a common everyday pathogen is like this typical clown, this generic clown here, right? And it has certain features that you or I would very easily, without thinking twice, associate with it being a clown. Things like rainbow hair, white face paint, or a colorful outfit, right? These are typical clown pathogen features. So any one of these three things, rainbow hair, face paint, or colorful outfit, could be used pretty reliably to identify whether a clown is present. Right? So let's look at this image. So here we have a clown. This clown has now sort of invaded, right, this typical sort of beach boardwalk scene here. I think that maybe this is like Venice Beach in Southern California. Right? And he's pretty easy to spot. Why? Because you or I know that these features that we see on him make him a clown, right? So if this were a pathogen, a common everyday pathogen that enters your tissue, for example, let's say you get a cut, right? You scrape yourself and some bacteria gets in. If there's sort of normal everyday bacteria, then what does your immune system need to be able to detect it? Well, you'd have to have basically a pretty modest security system. You'd have like our friend Mall Cop here, right, Paul, right, who really just represents kind of like a moderately trained, right, not super specialized security force. So in this case, you would have different cells in your body and different proteins, different molecules that have evolved to be able to recognize certain features of the pathogen. Let's say you would have certain mall cops who are trained to recognize rainbow hair, other ones that are trained to recognize face paint, right? Or other ones that are recognized to recognize a colorful outfit, right? So here is mall cop or beach boardwalk cop, whatever you want to call it, security, right, wandering around, right? And he sees, oh, this guy has rainbow hair. And so he says, oh, that's the sign of a pathogen, right? So mall cop gets on his walkie-talkie and he, communicates back to like the security shack or whatever the central place is and says, hey, I see rainbow hair here, right? I think something's up. I think there's a pathogen, right? And then the dispatch says, okay, all right, yeah, okay, that's good to know. That's kind of like, be on alert, right? And then a second mall cop says, hey, I see the same thing. I see colorful outfit, right? And then a third security guard walkie-talkies in and says, yeah, I see white face paint. Then that builds up enough evidence that the dispatch would then say, okay, right, looks like we have an infection going on, right? You guys go ahead, take them out. Right? And then these mall cops would then move in and very quickly and easily go ahead and arrest the clown, right? So because these patrolling security cells, if you want to think of them that way, right, you are born with them, right? The information to carry out these types of procedures is encoded for by the genes in your body, the genes that encode for the various proteins that are used by different types of immune cells to be able to identify different features that are common everyday generic pathogen features. So therefore, because you are born with this ability, right, and the whole set of things that your immune cells know to look for in a typical clown is built into your system, because after millions of years of evolution, when we see it over and over and over again, it makes sense, right? Our immune system would have evolved to incorporate those into its ability to detect things. We say then that this response is innate. You are born with it, right? So your innate immune system is geared up to take care of the vast majority of everyday infections like that. Some of the benefits are you only need a limited number of controlling enforcers, right, in order to spot a common everyday pathogen. Right? If the numbers of pathogens are in very modest numbers, they can be dealt with very easily by these patrolling enforcers. And this is really important too, right? Maintaining this level of security comes at a very moderate cost, right? Because it comes built in to the way that your genes are evolved to be able to do these things. All right. But let's look at a different scenario. What about if instead of a common everyday generic pathogen, right, you are infected by something different, right? So instead of your sort of cliche stereotype clown with the rainbow hair, you know, and the really colorful outfit, here comes this clown, right? This is, I think of as an exotic pathogen, right? Something that's not everyday. We also kind of refer to him as bad clown, right? So look at bad clown, right? So he doesn't have much white face paint. There is still some. He doesn't have a colorful outfit. He has this black t-shirt, right? And he doesn't have rainbow paint, right? He has this really badass straw hat here, right? Really different. So what does that mean? If bad clown comes around, right, those patrolling enforcer mall cops who are looking for rainbow hair or colorful outfit, they're not going to see him. Right? Maybe the ones who are trained to look for white face paint might see him, but he doesn't have much white face paint. So maybe the response of those security guards would be kind of, you know, they walk into, I see something that has a little white face, but I'm not really sure, right? And then the dispatch people are like, well, all right, then whatever, just see what happens, right? And that's the problem, because if you don't have a nice quick response to take care of bad clown here, right, bad clown will just start doing what bad clown does, right? And that means carry out its genetic programming, his genetic programming, which means he'll start to multiply, he'll start to spread throughout your body, right? He'll start using your body's resources, and he might start causing severe illness, right? So this requires a special response, right? Because your typical mall cops are not going to take care of him. Right? So what do you need? You need something really special, focused, and powerful. Your immune system must adapt to this new target, right, that up until now, it would not have even concerned itself with as being a threat. So one of the keys to this then is identifying that bad clown is in fact still a clown, right, and needs to be sort of taken care of, right? And then you have to pass the message around. So recognizing and raising the alarm is like printing out wanted posters with bad clown's picture on it, right? And then spreading that information around so that now your immune system suddenly realizes, whoa, right? Yeah, I just saw him. I didn't realize that he was, you know, a threat, but now that I see that he is a threat, right, we better act on this, okay? Then you have to mobilize special security forces, right? Because Mall Cop already had his chance, right? In the meantime, what's happened? Since Mall Cop wasn't doing anything, bad clown has already begun to spread. You are already getting sick, right? And your response now has to be a lot more powerful to take care of things quickly. So that's why you mobilize a different set of security forces. These are like the SWAT team, right? The SWAT team gets mobilized, they go in and they take the threat out, right? Importantly, right, because this has taken time, what's happening to you in the meantime? You are getting sicker and sicker and sicker, right? Just like the piece of moldy bread, right, that doesn't have an immune system, and the mold is spreading all over it and eventually taking over the bread, causing the whole bread to just like be used up, right? Your body is slowly being used up and destroyed by the presence of this pathogen, interfering with your normal body's functions, right? So you don't have time to wait. You got to take care of it. Once you do, if the SWAT team is successful, right, and is able to take care of bad clown, boy, the next time bad clown comes along, you don't want to have to go through that again, right? And think about it this way. If you're exposed to a pathogen one time from the environment around you, right, there's a really good chance that you're going to be exposed to it again at some point. Maybe not days later, weeks later, months later, but maybe years later, potentially, right? So it'd be really nice if you actually had some ability to remember what bad clown looks like, right? So that next time, if bad clown comes back, right, you don't have to waste valuable time, right, getting this specialized force moving. Right? So how do you remember that? Well, you printed out all those wanted posters, right? So there you go. The wanted posters are the memory, right, of what bad clown looks like. So that now, right, mall cops, right, can benefit from knowing, oh, if you happen to see bad clown, you need to take care of them, right? Okay, and what are those wanted posters? Those wanted posters are our antibodies, right? And we're going to learn a lot about antibodies this semester. Okay. So that's why we call this side of our immune system the adaptive side, right? It has to adapt to a novel pathogen exposure, right? And through life, hopefully, remember all of these encounters, right, in the form of antibodies, in the form of these wanted posters, so that the next time the pathogen comes back, right, you don't risk getting sick and potentially dying. Okay. Let's compare and contrast then these two arms of our immune system, right? The pros and cons. Because why do we have to have both? Right? Well, innate immunity, right, the effector mechanisms that are involved, and when I say effector mechanisms, what I usually refer to are the types of mechanisms that your immune system actually employs to directly target a pathogen. That might be, for example, particular cells that interact and maybe destroy to neutralize a pathogen, right? Or it might be certain proteins that are produced by your immune system that just by the function of them being free-floating molecules can interact and target the pathogen, right? So that's what we mean by effector mechanisms. So the innate immunity side is mainly concerned with effector mechanisms for general responses. Right? They recognize typical pathogen features, like typical clown features. Right? The pros of this is that you can have a very quick response. Right? So these effector cells, for example, or effector molecules that are circulating around in your body right now, right, they're on the lookout for these kind of real standout generic features of pathogens so they can have a quick response. And the other benefit is that it's very modest to maintain this sort of type of innate immunity. Right? The cons of this are that, as we talked about, right, these innate effector components might overlook a non-typical invader, right, and therefore miss out and allow that pathogen to actually get an upper hand and start multiplying and colonizing your tissues. And the other con is that the response plan of your innate system is always the same, right? I mean, you can kind of see, like Mall Cop, right? He's modestly trained. He's modestly trained to look for certain features. And if he sees those features, he always carries out the same game plan, right, in terms of how to take care of it. Right? And it's good because that game plan and the things that Malkop is looking for, right, have become part of our innate immune system because for most of the time it works. Right? Carrying out that same game plan or response plan works the majority of the time, right? But it's not flexible. So let's look at adaptive immunity on the bottom. Right? So the adaptive side of our immune system, the effector mechanisms are designed for a specialized, highly focused, highly powerful defense. This means that there's the requirement for extra training to identify a novel pathogen as being a threat in the first place. So the pros of this are that once you get the SWAT team going, it is an overwhelming reaction. Right? And as part of our adaptive immune system, we'll learn about this, right? You have the ability to remember, your immune system remembers the identity of a pathogen for next time so that you don't have to start from square one again. The cons of this are that it takes valuable time to coordinate all of this. Right? It takes, in fact, over a week or more for your adaptive system to finally kind of wake up and get going. Right? And during that time, you're just getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And the other con is that it's very expensive to maintain this. What do I mean by expensive? Think about it this way. A SWAT team, right, is really good at taking out a target, right? So why is it that our local shopping malls, like I live on the Windward side and I go to, for example, Windward Mall, right? And there are probably shoplifters there, doing their bad thing every day. And, maybe people are getting in fights in the food court. Why don't we just always have SWAT teams stationed in all of our shopping malls? Right? Because obviously, if anything happened, boy, the SWAT team, they would just take care of it really fast, right? I think it's pretty obvious. We don't have that because it's way too expensive. I mean, come on, right? You can't have a SWAT team constantly patrolling every shopping mall. That's why it's okay that we get away with just having, our normal, moderately trained mall security, mall cop, right? But that's why you then have the trade-off. Okay. So both sides of our immune system, the innate that we are born with, that we're pre-programmed with, and the adaptive that represents all the stuff that we have to confront during our own life, right, and have to learn how to deal with in order to keep staying alive, right? Both sides work together. So let's appreciate this on this figure here. So what we're looking at is, let's pretend that an infection takes place. Right? And then over time on the x-axis might be a matter of hours and days since the initial infection. Right? Now, remember, here's a reminder. Right? In our class in immunology, our definition of infection is the moment pathogens breach a physical barrier of our body, right, and get into the tissues of our body. That is the moment of infection. Right? That's an important definition. Right. So make a note of this, because again, this is a good example of how the way we are sort of brought up thinking about different things, right, is a bit too vague and general, right, and actually confuses things. When we are studying as being budding immunologists, right, we need to have much clearer, well-defined definitions of things, right, like inside versus outside of the body that we talked about last time, and now infection. What does that really mean? I think ever since we were little kids, right, you knew that if you wiped out on your bike or skateboard, right, like, ow, you're scraped up, right, that sometimes by the next day, it's fine, right? And you look at it and you're like, oh, that's good, right? You don't even think about it anymore, right? But we also know that there's some times where maybe a couple of days later, oh boy, it's getting red and puffy and sensitive to the touch, right? The way we typically are brought up thinking, it's only then that we say, oh no, my cut got infected, right? But that's not true. That's not a good way of thinking about it in immunology terms, because the reality is the moment you got the cut and microbes got in, that was the start of infection, right? If your innate immune system takes care of it and it goes away, right, you don't notice it anymore. Great. Right? That's how most infections are dealt with every single day. right? And it doesn't even have to be something that you obviously think of as a cut, right? I mentioned to you, like brushing your teeth. Right? This morning I was brushing my teeth and I was talking to my wife at the same time, right? And then I jammed the toothbrush up against my gum, like, ow, right? And then I looked, oh no, there's like a little bit of blood, right? I don't think about it, right? I'm not like, oh boy, I'm gonna die now, right? But what's happening, right? That's the moment now that I've breached a physical barrier of my body, the gums, right? The epithelial lining of my gums, and bacteria, yeah, is getting in, right? That's an infection. But by now, several hours later in the day, I don't notice it anymore. I would have even forgotten about it if it weren't for the fact that, I'm giving this lecture right now. So the vast majority of infections are taken care of, right, by our innate system. So let's say bad clown comes along, right, and he infects the body. In normal people who have a strong innate side and a strong adaptive side to their immune systems, the course of infection might be something like the yellow curve here, right? Where X is the time, Y is the, just sort of for generic argument's sake, the spreading of bad clown inside of the tissues and the body, right? So when bad clown enters, that's technically the start of infection. The innate system goes to work, right? But because bad clown is different enough than sort of common everyday generic pathogens, right? Because he only has a little bit of white face paint and he definitely doesn't have the rainbow hair or the colorful outfit. What's happening, right? Is bad clown is being acted upon by the innate immune system, because you do have some enforcers who do recognize a little bit of that white face paint, right? So there is some activity directed against bad clown as bad clown is multiplying, right? But bad clown's able to escape that, right? So he's spreading and spreading and spreading because unfortunately your innate system is just not being alerted enough, right? So at a certain point, right, the body is now getting sick. And at a certain point, maybe several days to a week later, the adaptive response has to turn on, right? So once the adaptive response turns on, boy, it goes to work and it takes care of bad clown, right? The SWAT team moves in and that's it, right? And then bad clown is cleared. So that's the normal course of you or I dealing with something like a cold or the flu, right? That makes us sick. Many people have genetic backgrounds that unfortunately might mean that certain components of their immune system are compromised. So let's imagine that somebody has a weakened innate immunity side. Right? What that means is when bad clown comes in, maybe the innate system has little to no ability to do anything to recognize bad clown. So as a result, right, population of bad clown just explodes. And so obviously these people are at much greater risk of getting seriously, seriously sick or dying, right, from pathogens that a person with a healthy immune system might get a little sick from, but then ultimately recover from. Right? What about people who have a weakened adaptive immunity? If they still have good innate immunity, then the shape of the green line might not be that different, right, at the start, because their innate side is still trying to kind of figure out what's going on here. But the problem is once it gets out of control, they cannot call in the SWAT team, right? So as a result, with only an innate side still working, right, the population of bad clown also continues to grow, right, eventually leading to potentially very serious illness or maybe even death. Right? So this allows you to see how the two sides, the two arms of our immune system actually do work together, right, as a process of time from initial infection. Right. So let's take a look, right, at how our innate system works. So there are two main goals to the innate system. If you just imagine what are the goals of mall cop patrolling the mall. Right? One is recognizing that a pathogen is present. And so this involves things like proteins that are floating through the blood that are soluble, right? Meaning that they are proteins that easily float in the blood, and interactions with different receptors that are on the surfaces of effector cells. Okay? So what do I mean by that? when we use the example or the analogy of Mall Cop, we're saying Mall Cop sees with his eyes the rainbow wig and identifies that as a clown, right? Now, obviously, a cell doesn't look out with eyes and look for things, right? It has to actually interact with things that it recognizes in order to identify it. So on the surface of innate effector cells, you would have certain receptor proteins that are the right shape to be able to interact with the presence of other molecules on a pathogen that represent the rainbow hair or the white face paint or the colorful outfit, right? And then if you have that interaction, then that effector cell can be activated. So these receptors or these free-floating proteins, they might bind directly to the pathogen itself, or they may interact with different products that the pathogen puts out, right? Bacteria, they produce all kinds of things that over evolutionary time, right, also serve as generic kind of signs that there's bacteria present, right? So an effector cell doesn't even have to bind directly to the bacteria if it can detect the presence of these different bacterial products that are being made that can also wake up our innate system, right? And these effector cells might bind to, right, something like not even a pathogen, but it may bind to one of our own cells in our body that has been infected, right? And in the process of that cell in our body being infected, that cell might have changed and gotten all messed up by the pathogen, right? So therefore, our innate effector cells might recognize this was a normal cell, but now it's showing weird signs, right? And so therefore, maybe something has to be done with this here. Okay. So identifying the pathogen is present is one thing, but then you need to be able to actually carry out these effector mechanisms of eliminating it, right? So various effector cell types will physically engulf bacteria or viruses, thereby basically eating them up to destroy them. They may also target infected cells of our body and tell those cells of our body, hey, you're infected. You know, stop doing what you're doing and just go ahead and eliminate yourself to get rid of yourself and this threat that's inside of you. Right? Also, very importantly, right, there are these free-floating proteins that are just effector molecules that are called complement proteins. Right? Complement, not like with an I, like, you know, oh, you're a very nice, you know, protein. No, complement meaning to sort of help out with something else, right? Complement proteins mark the surfaces of pathogens, seeking out sort of these pathogens to be labeled as sort of a generic way of showing our immune system, hey, this thing doesn't belong here, whatever it is, right? You better go ahead and get rid of it, all right? And these complement proteins, as we will learn, will help other effector cells to do their job of maybe eating up the pathogen, or these complement proteins at the same time can directly disrupt and interfere with the normal function of a pathogen, thereby neutralizing it that way. So again, as a reminder, all of these protein and cell factors are pre-programmed as part of our individual genetic makeup, right? Through millions of years of evolution, we've just evolved to have these features. And so that's why they are an innate part of us, right? And they serve as our innate immunity. And it's pretty damn good, right? Because your innate side of your immune system can take care of like 99.9% of all the pathogens that you encounter every day, right? As a product of having millions of years of evolution to tweak it and get it to be so robust, right? So that brings me to this cartoon. We will revisit this cartoon over and over this semester as we learn about these different cells. This is a nice cartoon. What it is showing are the different lineages that give rise to the different cell types that make up our immune system. Okay? You start from the top, and this brown cell is a hematopoietic stem cell. Right? Weird word. What does that mean? Right? Hematopoietic, it comes from Greek, right? Hema means blood related. Right? And poetic, I mean, hey, if you just say the word poetic, what do you think of? You think of poems, right? Because in Greek, poem means the creation of something, right? Whether a beautiful poem, or in this case, it's a cell that's going to give rise and create other cell types, specifically blood cell related types. So this is a hemopoietic stem cell found in your bone marrow, right? As that hematopoietic stem cell divides, it differentiates, meaning it carries out different gene programs in it, right, to become one of the various mature, fully differentiated cell types that then go to work as part of our immune system. On the right, you can see if this hematopoietic stem cell is heading down this pathway, it goes through these intermediate forms that we call myeloid precursor cells. Myeloid refers to the fact that it's eventually going to give rise to different types of blood cells, right? As it continues to differentiate, it might actually go down the pathway of becoming things like megakaryocytes that produce platelets, or erythroblasts that end up turning into our red blood cells or erythrocytes. Okay. We typically don't think of platelets and red blood cells as being an important part of our immune system, but they do actually contribute. You can see also it can go down this pathway and give rise to these numerous cells down here, things like macrophages, dendritic cells, and also these what we call granulocytes, because they have speckles inside of them that look like granules of sand or something like that. Okay. On this left side, you can see that the stem cell from the start could actually start changing in a different way. It could actually become what we call a lymphoid precursor. And this will continue to develop, right, and become one of the various lymphocytes in our immune system, things like natural killer cells, B cells, and T cells. Okay. I think a lot of you are probably really interested and eager to learn more about B cells and T cells, right? Because you hear a lot about those in diseases, because B cells become plasma cells, right? And T cells then can carry out certain adaptive immune responses, right? The T cells are actually the SWAT team that goes to work. Right? The B cells produce antibodies, right, which are the wanted posters that it took time, but once the B cells have figured it out, right, they can now identify a novel threat, right, and work with the T cells to get them going so that they can hone in and take care of that threat, like bad clown. Right? So these over here are the ones that function in our innate arm of our immune system. The macrophages, dendritic cells, and these various granulocytes, right, are squarely in our innate side. The NK cell, which is a natural killer cell, you got to love that name, right? Natural killer cell, evolved from the lymphoid side, right? But it actually functions more as an innate effector. Okay. On the other hand, the small lymphocytes like the B cells and T cells and the plasma cells and effector T cells that they become absolutely are part of the adaptive side. Right? So like I said, we'll go back to this and look at it over and over again during the semester, okay, as we talk about these different cells and how they work. For now, let's consider this. In your blood, you obviously have many of these immune cells floating around. Right? You might wonder, well, how many of each type do I have floating around in my blood? Because it's not like you expect that every single cell type on this cartoon is present in the same amount in your body right now, right? So let's start with this. There are 5 types of leukocytes found in the blood. Oh, so I should point out leukocyte, right, again, comes from Greek. Cyte means what? Like cytoplasm, right? So a lot of times you just cells have the name cyte in them, right? From sort of like this old-fashioned way of thinking about them. Leuko means white, right? From Greek. So leukocytes are what we call the white blood cells, or the WBCs. In contrast, if you go back over to the far right here, erythrocytes, right? Erythro means red, right? So that's our red blood cells. Okay, so in our blood, we would actually find 5 types of these leukocytes freely circulating around in your blood right now, right? The 2 small lymphocyte types, and then monocytes, neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils. Right? But they're not all there in the same proportion. So the most abundant type of leukocyte that you have in your blood right now are the neutrophils, right? They consist of anywhere from 40 to 75% of all the white blood cells in your blood right now, right? And this varies from person to person, and it also varies depending upon if you're healthy or you're infected with something, right? Then comes so the job of the neutrophils is to phagocytose and kill microorganisms, right? We'll learn about how neutrophils work later. Then you have the small lymphocytes, like the B cells that are in charge of making those wanted posters, the antibodies, or we have T cells that are the SWAT team, right, that are ready to go out there and kill the targets, right? We'll also learn that there are T cells that are actually helpful. They're helper T cells, not just cytotoxic killer T cells, right? So those consist of about 20 to 50%. Monocytes are cells that are released from your bone marrow, because remember, all of these are coming from your bone marrow. They circulate in your blood, and when they reach certain destinations around tissues in your body, they may leave the blood and go into your tissues and then finish differentiating to become things like macrophages that eat up different cells, different pathogens, or things like dendritic cells that we'll learn about later. So about 2 to 10% of the white blood cells are monocytes. Right? Then you have the rarer ones, these granulocytes, and you can very clearly see from these images why we call them granulocytes, right? Granulocytes. Eosinophils, 1 to 6%. They're more in charge of things like detecting and attacking parasites. And likewise, basophils also attack parasites, but these are the rarest ones, right? Less than 1% of your white blood cells. So you don't necessarily have to memorize these percentages, right? But it's not that hard. And I think for those of you who are pursuing any kind of health-related thing, it's kind of good to know this, right? I mean, I think it might even be like some MCAT kind of related question. But an easy way to remember the order is by this mnemonic, right? Never let monkeys eat bananas, right? If you can just remember, never let monkeys eat bananas, hey, you're all set. You now know the relative populations of these, right? Yeah, this guy, he's like, I hate immunology, right? What a drag. Okay. So let's look at the macrophage as an example of a sort of an innate effector cell, right? Here's a big macrophage. On its surface, these blue things are certain receptor proteins. They are the right shape to be able to detect common, everyday, generic pathogen features on something like this common, everyday bacteria, right? So these little red bumps on the bacteria would be like the rainbow wig or something like that, right? So this macrophage is able to bind to the bacteria and it will engulf it through phagocytosis. Then the bacteria will be destroyed inside the cell as this phagosome vesicle that contains it fuses with lysosomal vesicles that contain all kinds of enzymes and things like that would then destroy it, right? So that's one way that macrophages immediately go to work taking care of bacteria. Right? On the other hand, right, the bacteria might be releasing different components, and the macrophage might pick up on those components because it has maybe a slightly different type of receptor that picks up this other component here. And in this case, the receptor protein might signal the macrophage through a series of different proteins interacting with each other to regulate gene expression. So the macrophage will turn on now the production of different proteins from certain genes that have been silent up until now. And the protein products of those might be these colorful triangles, right? And these colorful triangles are proteins. They are released by the macrophage, and they serve as messages to the rest of your immune system. Hey, I'm detecting something here, right? Be on alert. So in other words, these different cartoon triangles are Mall Cop getting on the walkie-talkie, right? Communicating with his fellow teammates here. We call these signaling molecules cytokines, right? And we'll study a lot of cytokines as we progress through the semester. Okay. All right. So I'm actually going to stop there today. We have, there's like 3 more slides that I didn't get to, but it's okay. I'll just add those on to the beginning of Friday's lecture. All right. But I want you to take a look at this again and really think about, right, what this is showing. This shows that all of the cells that make up our immune system come from, right, the hematopoietic stem cells that are part of our bone marrow. And that's why I think you know this, right, that the bone marrow is so important for our immunity, because it's where all of these cells first are generated, right? Most of them leave the bone marrow already in their fully differentiated, ready to go to work state, right? Things like the monocytes, right? That they're sort of an intermediate state because they really go to work once they get to certain tissues and can become macrophages or dendritic cells. Other cells, for example, T cells, we'll learn about, right, still have to go through additional maturation elsewhere in the body, right, in different types of tissues. And we will learn that B cells and T cells, right, actually carry out their job in different types of tissues rather than just the blood. Okay. All right. So why don't we end there today? And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have if you want to just go ahead and type in the chat. Otherwise, you guys are free to go. And I wanted to remind you that, oops, sorry, slide got messed up. I wanted to remind you to go ahead and look for the practice quiz, right? Give that practice quiz a try in La Lima. The first real quiz I'll open up when I think it's appropriate, when we've covered other chapter 2 material. You can already get started on the acquisitive once you get the announcement from me that that's ready to go. All right. So otherwise, have a great rest of your Wednesday. I will see you on Friday. Okay. All right. So let's go to the questions here. Here's a question. What category would amoeba-caused diseases fall into? Right. So I'm not sure what you mean by category, right? Because yes, an amoeba certainly would be an example of a pathogen, right, that causes diseases in the body. Right. The real issue is how the body responds to it. For example, right, a lot of microbes like amoebas, if they entered the body and got into the tissues, your innate system would be pretty good at taking care of them. Right. So in other words, there are bound to be many, many instances when something, single cellular protist or something got into your body and your innate system did recognize it and eliminated it. If in fact the amoeba was able to avoid your innate immune system and therefore is allowed to continue, damaging your tissues and things like that, then yeah, you would expect to have eventually an adaptive immune response to try to take care of it. Okay. One of the reasons that amoeboid diseases are so kind of notorious, and this is probably why you're bringing it up, right, is because a lot of times amoebas are pretty successful in avoiding the immune system entirely. And you think, well, why is that? Right? It's a foreign thing. It has to do with the fact that amoebas are eukaryotic cells, right? Just like the cells in our own body, compared to something like a bacteria that would be a prokaryotic cell. Right? So our body doesn't produce prokaryotic cells, right? So any prokaryotic cell, like a bacteria that comes in, it's pretty obvious it doesn't belong. But something like an amoeba, right, it is a eukaryotic cell. So therefore, our immune system is not as sensitive to identifying it as being a threat right away, right? And that's part of the reason why amoebas oftentimes, you hear about these horrible stories, right? You swim in like a pond or something, and then, you get an amoeba up your nose, and then it ends up getting in your brain, right? And then you hear about these horrible stories about these amoebas in the brain that the doctors can't do anything about, right? And that's why it's a trade-off, because we've evolved, right, to be a little bit more tolerant of eukaryotic cells, right, out of the concern or the fear that our immune system might be more likely to make mistakes and see our own cells, which are eukaryotic cells, right, as being a potential threat, right? So that's one thing we'll learn about this semester later on, is how our immune system actually has to tolerate our own cells, right, and not go crazy and actually start attacking our own cells and tissues. And of course, you can probably already figure this out, the basis of autoimmune diseases is that tolerance breaking down, and for some reason, the immune system turning on the body's own cells and tissues. Right? All right, so hopefully that answers your question. Let's see. Some technical questions about quizzes. Yeah, quizzes, you only have one try, right? You have one shot at it. Otherwise, you could take it and then go back and everybody would get 100 on their quiz eventually, right? So the quizzes are one try. That's why I encourage you to try the practice quiz first, just to make sure that your LaLima works well and you know how it works. Okay. Here's a question. How long does it take time-wise for adaptive immunity to be activated when a new pathogen comes about? It usually takes over a week, right? That's why it's so important that when your adaptive immunity finally does activate, that the response is so strong. Why does it take a week? Because it takes a long time on molecular terms, cellular terms, right, for your cells or immune system to actually learn or realize that there's a new threat present, right? And to be able to identify certain unique features on that pathogen that can serve as the wanted posters, right? Importantly, you don't want to generate wanted posters too quickly if, in fact, those wanted posters might end up misidentifying other cells in your normal body's tissues as being a target, right? So it takes time to actually generate the type of antibody response that's needed, right? And it usually takes over a week. So that actually does mean also, so here's a follow-up question, right? So another student asked, so does adaptive immune response only start when you start feeling sick, or can it start working before you experience symptoms, right? Feeling sick is an interesting phenomenon because we automatically think that feeling sick is a direct result of something that the pathogen is doing, right? That's not always the case. A lot of times, much of the sensations or the experiences that we associate with feeling sick, like fatigued, weak, achy joints, or throwing up, right, fever, things like that, are actually not caused by the pathogen itself. Because after all, what would the pathogen gain from doing any of those things, right? All it wants to do is just keep using up resources that your body's tissues are providing it, right? Many times, those sensations of illness actually are part of our immune system reacting. And those different types of responses, like fever, fatigue, achy joints, are actually evolutionary mechanisms for us to actually allow our adaptive immune response, right, or even our innate immune response, we'll learn about this, to do their job better. Okay, and we'll learn why later. That's why you all know, right? You can catch something like COVID and be asymptomatic, right? That doesn't mean that the virus inside of you is not doing anything, right? It just means that much of the symptoms in your particular case, right, that people associate with feeling sick, right, you're not experiencing, right, for whatever reason. Right? Your immune system is kind of responding differently. But what it does mean is by the time you feel sick from catching a cold or flu, whatever, right, you have to work back in time in your head and realize, oh, the actual infection probably happened several days before. And it's just taken time now for these different types of physiological changes to take place. Well, this is something we'll discuss in a later lecture, because I think most of the classes has already left the question answer session, right? Okay. Homework. Is there an unlimited number of questions, or can you potentially fail to meet the point requirement? That's a good question. No, I think the way it works is if you're really having a tough time with it and you're digging yourself a big hole by losing points, I shouldn't laugh, right? That sounds mean. I think basically the IDAP keeps recycling the questions until you get them all right, okay? But that doesn't mean just go into it and blindly start guessing and answering, right? Because that's the difference between the homework assignment taking you 30 minutes versus the homework assignment taking you like an hour and 30 minutes, right? Is how seriously you actually try to answer the questions, okay? Because I've had students before who really complained about the IDAP and they say it took them 2 hours, whereas like the class average was like, the class took 30 minutes, right? And they hate the IDAP. And I asked them, well, how are you doing it? And they're like, well, I just randomly guess until I eventually get everything right. And I'm like, well, no kidding. That's why it took you an hour and a half. So you have like no right to like say you hate the IDAP, right? Anyhow, okay. All All right. So that's it for today. So I'll see you guys on Friday. Have a good rest of your day. All right. Bye-bye.